Hello, folks. Time for another movie retrospective, going back to the 80s, going back to sort of a horror comedy that I feel like doesn't get quite the attention as some of the other horror comedies from the 80s, like some of the more iconic ones. This is The Burbs from 1989.
I had never seen it.
You had never seen it? Yeah.
No, she showed it to me. It was the first time I had seen it.
Yeah. I feel like this is another one. This movie, even though it came out much later than, say, The Man with Two Brains, which we also did a retrospective on, I feel like it kind of occupies the same, like, cultural space. It's like, it's a movie that had a lot of big stars in it, had a really big director, like a well-known director, and is like really funny, has aged really well, but for some reason it doesn't seem to like come up in conversation as much as, you know, some of the other like better known ones. You know what I mean?
What I noticed in is it had that very stereotypical 1980s and 90s era kind of corporate middle America vibe to it.
Yeah.
All the houses and the cars and kind of like the corporate culture with consumerism, but everybody was kind of manifesting it in different ways. Some of the people were misfits, you know, some of the families were misfits, and some of them were more, you know, I guess you could say mainstream. But it reminded me of kind of growing up.
Well, I feel like, and like I said, this was another movie that I saw probably a million times, like in the late 80s and early 90s. I might have seen it in the theater, I can't really remember, but I for sure saw it on cable, like for years and years afterward. I think I even taped it on VHS. And for real, me and my, just like Man with Two Brains, this movie is so fucking quotable, but if you like say quotes from it, nobody knows what the hell you're talking about. Much like I mentioned on Man with Two Brains, I said, if I say to somebody, you cooked her nines, they don't know what I'm talking about. Same thing here. It's like me and my brother would be in fucking like Michael's or Joanne Fabrics or whatever, and you'd see like a picture frame, like with a stock photo of a person, we'd go, came with the frame. And like, no one would know what we were talking about. So this is another one of those movies that I saw a million times as a kid, and Shudder added it just recently. And I was so excited, and I wanted to see it again and see if I liked it as much as I did back then. And happily, it really does hold up. Now, this is a very bold statement that I'm going to make, perhaps, or a hot take, or whatever you want to call it. This was directed by Joe Dante, obviously, probably most famous for Gremlins, but he also made The Howling, Inner Space. He made like tons and tons of other movies of this type in the 80s. I'm going to say I like The Burbs better than Gremlins, a little bit better.
They're a different kind of movie.
They are a very different kind of movie. Because, and I mean, Gremlins, Shudder also added Gremlins 1 and 2, so I watched all three of these like within a few days of each other because I hadn't seen Gremlins since I was a kid. So I wanted to see, I love Gremlins, but I do feel like it's like zanier, and I feel like the scenes like with, you know, when they turn into the Gremlins and they kind of go wreaking havoc around the town and everything, like I feel like those parts like go on a little bit too long. Like with all the puppets, like, look, one's in drag and one's blowing this thing up and one's...
But you know, I remember seeing that in its day, and people were enjoying those extended scenes. Yeah. Because back in those days, we weren't really used to that level of special effects.
Right, because those puppets were amazing.
They were obviously puppets, but they were really good puppets. Yeah. And I remember being impressed, thinking, man, those things look pretty real. Yeah. You look at it now, they don't look real at all. But
they're still awesome puppets.
They're good puppets, but they don't look real. And it's a pretty damn zany movie. It's
zanier than I remember.
Yeah, out of the two Gremlin movies, I'm going to say probably Gremlins 2 is better than Gremlins 1, and in a way, it seemed like the story had a little bit of a bigger scope. Although Gremlins 1 was good too.
Well, I like Gremlins 1 better than, just because I like the small town feel of it more than, because the second one was kind of in the big city. And
Gremlins 2 was basically a retake on Die Hard.
It was, yeah.
That's
kind of what they were parodying.
Yeah.
But the thing about The Burbs is that, you know, the guy that wrote it, Joe Dante didn't write it, but the guy that wrote it said that he got the idea. He's like, I wanted to take this idea of like this perfect childhood, like he had like an Ozzie and Harriet type of childhood where everybody knew their neighbors and stuff like that. He said, but you know, even when you grow up in an environment like that, like in middle America or whatever, he's like, every now and then you'd hear about like some neighbor of yours that like flipped out and like shot his whole family and stuff like that. So he really wanted to do a comedy kind of exploring, you know, kind of the dark side of suburbia, but make it super, super funny.
Well, it was understandable. I mean,
Right.
if you look at these movies today, especially this one, it could dovetail right in with that dead mall culture that you find online today.
Yeah.
People that like to look at, Dan Bell, dead mall videos. This is like this movie is from that era.
Yeah.
When malls were just
89.
booming, and mainstream middle America, especially like white middle America, there was this lifestyle our parents were being sold. Really, it's more that our parents, not so much our generation. It was almost kind of like
we're cynical bastards.
Yeah, it was more kind of like a new and improved, more corporate friendlier version of the 1950s culture.
Yeah.
And we thought it was all futuristic and that things were going to build upon that. We didn't realize that shit was going to fall apart.
Yeah.
And people got credit cards and jobs, and they paid credit cards and rotating credit, and they just thought it would just go on forever. Endless consumption, exponential growth, and I'll be a millionaire in a couple of years. No, it's not how it went for you, dude. Your plant shut down. Your job got exported. It was a different time.
But like I said,
watching these things just kind of brings me back to those times. And everyone kind of had, or our parents, when you lived in those suburban environments, it kind of had a veneer of acceptability, and it was almost kind of like a uniform in a certain way. But some people were perpetrating; they were fronting to be that. That's not who they really were.
Yeah,
there's a temporary status, So they kill each other, or they, dude would get involved with drugs, or he'd dump his wife for a girl that was 20 years younger. Just all kinds of shit like that.
That's what I mean. I think probably that's why I liked this movie so much, just because one, like I said, we're Gen X. We tend to be like very cynical of everything that's told to us, and also. I didn't grow up in a middle class, which I grew up in a fucking trailer park, very poor. And so it was something that it just seemed like bullshit to me, because I knew like my family didn't have all those things, and to me it just seemed very fake. So I think I liked this movie so much just because it's almost like lampooning that type of thing, like in a gentle sort of way. It's not mean-spirited really. But yeah, so, and I should note too that the neighborhood where this was shot is not an actual neighborhood. It was on a Universal backlot, and it's the same neighborhood that they filmed Leave It to Beaver, same neighborhood where they filmed Dragnet from the 80s, the one which also had Tom Hanks in it, which this does as well, had the Munsters house that they kind of, messed with the front of it and filmed it so you couldn't really see, and so it wouldn't be recognized. But it's in like tons of movies and TV shows, like just redressed in various ways. But that's why I think Joe Dante didn't really want to shoot it just in one location at first, but when they said, this is kind of like, because he said it's almost kind of like it could work as a stage play, which I'm like, yeah, it actually kind of could now that I think about it.
It probably was a stage
play.
But
no, it wasn't. But he said it could work as one just because it was set in this one neighborhood, like on a cul-de-sac, really, not even a whole neighborhood. But like I said, if the neighborhood and the houses look familiar, it's because it's on a Universal backlot and has been used in millions and millions of things. So he liked playing with that. That you got this feeling of like, oh, it's the Leave It to Beaver neighborhood, because it was. So the premise of the story, Tom Hanks is Ray Peterson. And at this stage, I think now nowadays he's probably known more for his like dramatic roles and stuff like that. But in the 80s, he was like the go-to guy for being your everyman for comedy. I mean, he came up in comedy. He was in pretty much exclusively comedies, I think, until the late 80s or early 90s, if I recall correctly. So they got him to be, the lead in this. And I think he was really perfectly cast because he's so good at, one, being relatable and likable, but also he's funny without it being... like, without really trying to be. You know what I mean? Like, he's not cracking jokes. It's just...
Well, he was a goofy guy.
Yeah, it's a very natural, like, organic funniness.
Later on, he ended up being considered, like, a serious actor, like, doing dramatic roles. But the first time I saw that guy, he was just this geek in this...
Well, he started out on Bosom Buddies, on that sitcom.
I didn't see that, though. The first time I saw him, it was in a movie. It was a movie about Dungeons and Dragons, I think.
Mazes and Monsters.
Mazes and Monsters.
That was a TV movie.
Yeah.
About the evils of...
Damn, it sucked.
It really was. Well, it's bad in a way that's like kind of entertaining, like while you're cringing too. But that was, yeah.
Yeah, he didn't really stand out. He stood out only in retrospect. Looking back on it, he kind of stands out.
Yeah.
when he was first appearing in these movies, remember, I didn't really think there was anything to that dude.
Yeah, which is funny.
Yeah,
it's funny they became like super famous.
Super famous.
On.
I really didn't notice that guy until like when he played the mentally challenged guy.
Forrest Gump.
Forrest Gump, yeah.
But like I said, I think that his like natural humor that he brings to the role, like I said, he doesn't crack jokes. He's not like wisecracking or anything like that. That role in this movie actually goes to Rick Dukeman, who is his, who I think started out in stand-up, if I remember correctly. But he's like his like goofy, chunky neighbor that's like, you know, what kind of wisecracking all the time. But so whatever, they don't really specify like what Tom Hanks' job is in this movie, but he is taking a vacation, or as they would call it, a staycation. He's just going to stay home and lounge around the house and not work and not do anything all week. Now, his wife is played by Carrie Fisher, and she is obviously not super jazzed about having him hanging around the house. But, you know, he's like insistent. He's just going to hang around and do nothing. He's just going to sit around in his robe or whatever. Now, as it happens, you know, there's kind of like all these suburbanite, but they're all like kind of eccentric and they all live on this street. But they've noticed that this new family has moved into one of the houses, the Klopeks. And no one has ever really seen them, but they don't mow their lawn. They don't like clean up everything. You know, the house is like kind of crappy looking. And they've noticed that sometimes at night, there's this weird glow like coming out of the basement, and there's like all this really weird noise in there, like a big machine is running or something like that. So they all get like super curious about what the fuck is going on over there. And so while Ray, played by Tom Hanks, is on vacation, him and his neighbor, who's played by Rick Dukeman, and his other neighbor, who's played by Bruce Dern, who's like a army lieutenant or something like that.
He's a Vietnam veteran.
Yeah, and he's kind of like a little crazy. They all decide that they're going to kind of stake out the neighbor's house and see what the fucking deal is with these people. Right. So that's kind of the setup of the whole movie. And I'm probably going to spoil it, so, you know, like I said, it came out in 1989, so just chill out. But so the whole premise of the movie, like I said, so these three guys, you know, are like sneaking around the neighborhood and trying to figure out. So they're like spying on the neighbors. They see them doing like kind of weird things, like the one guy, Hans, who's actually played by the same guy that played the tall redheaded kid that was in Children of the Corn, that played Malachi. That guy, you know who I mean? Yeah, he plays this with like a scruffy kind of beard. And they see him one night like backing the car out of the driveway and then putting this big garbage bag that looks like a body, and he's putting it in the garbage can, and then he like starts whacking at it with a hoe like he's trying to kill it or something like that. So they're like, that's got to be a body, you guys, we're gonna check out, you know. So then like the next day, like the fucking garbage truck comes and they're stop, and they have to like dig in through the garbage. They're leaving fucking garbage all over the road and shit like that, and they don't find anything. And then they also see them kind of like digging in the backyard, like out in the dark in the rain, and they're like, oh, they're burying bodies. And so it just kind of like keeps escalating, and they just are like, you know, these three guys obviously have nothing better to do, and like their wives are just sitting there going, you guys are stupid. It's like there's nothing going on over there. You're just harassing these poor people for no reason. But they're like, no, they just insist that there's something going on over there. And then one of their neighbors, this old guy named Walter, he has like this poodle or a Bichon Frise or something like that, and it keeps like pooping in other people's yards, and so there's kind of that whole thing going on. And they notice that his dog is running around loose, and then when they go over to his house, he's like not there. And then one of them, Ray, I think, finds a bone in his backyard, and it is clearly a human bone. So at this point, they're like, okay, well, all bets are off. So they wait until the fucking Klopeks have gone out for the day, and then they start like, you know, they cut their alarm system and they like break into their house and shit like that. They're like, we are not leaving until we find a dead body. We're going to prove that this is what's going on and stuff like that. And like I said, their wives are just think they're being ridiculous. And they're like, look, why don't we just all go over there? We'll meet this family. You'll see that it's totally fine. They're totally normal. There's nothing weird going on. So they force all of them to go over there and meet these people. And it's three of them, the Klopeks, and it's just like the Hans, who's like the redheaded one, and then there's one that's played by Henry Gibson. He's like a doctor. He's very like soft-spoken and stuff. And then there's another one that's just kind of this grumpy, crabby old man. And they go in the house, and they're just as weird as everybody thinks they are. Like, they're acting really weird and sketchy, and they don't have any snacks for them. They just make them eat out of this tin of sardines and shit like that. And it's just like super weird. So there's that whole thing going on. And I didn't mention too that also, during all of this crazy shit, there is also fucking Corey Feldman is also in this movie. And he's like a teenager, but he lives next door to Bruce Dern's character. And he's supposed to be painting his house, but he's just like all jazzed because he's like, oh, you guys are like, he's like watching them, like what they're doing, like trying to find out about it. Like it's really exciting for him. So he starts inviting all his friends over, like to see, because all this shit's going to happen. They're ordering pizza. They're like sitting out drinking beer, smoking weed, like on their porch, like watching all this shit unfolding. So as this whole thing goes on, you kind of get to a thing where you think that it's all going to end up that the Klopeks are just weird, or there's other, because, they think that they killed this old man, Walter. And then late in the movie, after they've already broken into the house, they find a thing in the basement that they think is a crematorium. They start like digging in there, like looking for bones. They hit the gas line. They blow the fucking house up. And then they see that Walter comes home. And it turned out that Walter had like a heart attack or had some kind of health issue, and like his family took him to the hospital, and they forgot, and his dog was running around and stuff like that. So Walter is alive. So then all of them think, oh, well, we fucked up. We're stupid. We just blew their whole entire fucking house up, and they didn't do anything. But plot twist at the very, very end, and even like after, like Tom Hanks gives this big long fucking speech to his friend, played by Rick Dukeman, who's like, we're the ones that have been creeping around in their yard, and we're the ones that broke into their house. We blew it up. We did all this other kind of shit. They never did anything to us. And it's like, we always talk about all these people in suburbia, and it's like they're secretly psychos and stuff. He's like, that's us. He's like, we're the ones that were doing all this shit. So, and you think that that's like what the message of the movie is, that it's like, they shouldn't have just judged them because they were weirdos or whatever. But then at the very end, Tom Hanks has, the house is blown up and he gets hurt, so he has to go to the thing. And then the doctor, Klopek, who's played by Henry Gibson, like gets in the ambulance with him and says, oh, well, I know you probably found that skull that I had in the crematorium, so I'm gonna have to kill you now. And then he like flips out and he's like running out of the thing. And then it turns out that the trunk of their car is just full of skeletal remains. So it turned out that the crazy dudes that were stalking this poor family were right all along. Not only have the Klopeks like killed a whole bunch of people, they also killed the people who used to live in the house, because there was a thing earlier about how they didn't know like where the people that lived in that house went to, and it turned out that the Klopeks had killed them like to take the house over, and had killed other people too. So in a way, it's like I liked that it kind of subverted the message of, because like I said, you'd think the whole message of the movie is like, it was all a big misunderstanding. It's like they were just weirdos, and you suburbanites are like so square, and you just thought you're just picking on them because they're different from you. But it turned out that they were correct, that these people that were different from them were indeed mass murderers, and they were actually right. Not necessarily to blow their house up, but, they were actually right that, they were up to something.
What year did this come out again?
1989.
Okay. I thought it was earlier than that.
I did too, actually, and it was like really funny when Shudder put it up there, and I was like really excited. I was like, oh, I wanted to do this movie because I haven't seen it in such a long time. And then I could have sworn that it came out, I thought it came out the same year as Dragnet, which came out in 1987.
I forgot all about that one.
Yeah, that had Tom Hanks in it too, and Dan Aykroyd. That was actually pretty funny. Although I haven't seen that in a really long time either, so it might not have held up. But I think this one really does. Like I said, even though I thought it was earlier, so I was like,
well,
shit.
It is a movie of its time. It's definitely from a culture that's not really around anymore when you think about it. There is some of that suburban stuff. We live in the modern day equivalent of that.
Yeah.
Now. Just the people aren't really like that anymore. It's different generational changes.
Yeah.
But, yeah. Look, when I watched it, I didn't see it back then. When I watched it, I looked at it now. To me, it was kind of like a period piece. I liked it, but it didn't really. To me, it didn't really push the same buttons that it pushed in you, because I didn't see it as a kid, so I didn't really have a long history of knowing.
I mean, I wasn't a kid when I saw it. I was
well, you know
18,
what I'm talking about.
something like that.
That's 18, that's 19. A kid to us now.
Yeah. But you know, so another thing that I like, so even though, like I said, probably Gremlins is the more famous Joe Dante. I mean, I know he's directed like a shit ton of stuff, and I feel like this one kind of flies under the radar. But in a way, I like this one better because one, there's still like zany shit that happens, but it's not as over the top zany as Gremlins is. It's more believable because nothing really supernatural happens or anything like that. It's basically just these weirdos that live next to them that are killing people, you know, and them trying to find out about it. Like, shit that's unbelievable happens, but nothing is like paranormal or anything like that.
Watching it kind of reminded me of Edward Scissorhands to a certain extent.
Yeah. It's kind of the same vibe.
Didn't really have that same, you know, stylistic thing that what's his name does. What's that guy's name who did it?
Tim Burton.
Tim Burton. Yeah, all Tim Burton movies are Tim Burton-y.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? This one didn't really have that Tim Burton-iness to it. It was more along the lines of, imagine if, to me it kind of felt like, what would a comedy made by Spielberg look like? Like a zany comedy made by Steven Spielberg.
With horror elements.
With horror elements. It kind of had like a Spielbergian vibe. But I think a lot of people kind of emulated some of Spielberg's work, you know, in that era. And it's kind of making a comeback, too.
Yeah, and I think in a way, too, that, I mean, the whole Spielberg aesthetic, I think that was something that, I don't know if he did it on purpose, but I think Joe Dante was definitely trying to, not necessarily subvert it, but actually kind of have fun with it, you know, in the sense that, you know, whereas something like Poltergeist was, here's a nice middle-class family, nice middle-class neighborhood, or upper middle-class, whatever you want to call it, and then it's invaded by paranormal forces. What if you were invaded by your neighbors? Like, what if the same thing happened, but, like, they were up to something?
Yeah, and Jenny gave a pretty accurate kind of play-by-play of what happens in this movie, and really, that doesn't do it justice, because you have to see it happen, the delivery, the way the movie delivered these scenes is, you know, pretty entertaining.
Like I said, that is the best thing. And it's another kind of movie that has so many, like, great quotable lines, like, so many, like, just great little scenes. And I feel like it doesn't have, like, the same pop culture cachet as, like, maybe some other movies from the 80s, like, that have, like, kind of catchphrases or things that people remember. And that's kind of a shame, because I really think, particularly Tom Hanks and Rick Dukeman in this, are really, really good. I think they play off each other really well, because Rick Dukeman, like I said, he's kind of like a big, dumb, you know, jokester kind of thing. And then Tom Hanks is just like a regular guy, but also kind of dorky, and he does funny shit, like, without really trying to be funny. But I mean, there's just such great little, there's a scene at the beginning where Rick Dukeman comes over to the Petersons' house, and, like, you know, Tom Hanks and the family are sitting around eating breakfast, and, you know, Rick Dukeman is just, like, talking about the neighbors and how weird they are, and he's just going around their kitchen just eating shit out of their fridge, and, like, no one is saying anything about it. It's just, like, there's just great little moments like that, like, through the whole thing.
Kind of just took me back to pre-internet suburban culture.
Yeah, it definitely does have that vibe. It was a simpler time. Yeah, it definitely does have that vibe to it. Yeah. And I kind of like...
I could hear the mall music playing in the background.
Yeah. I was watching a video earlier that was like kind of a review of the Burbs, and the guy that made the video was reframing the movie as Ricky, who is Corey Feldman's character, as he was the one... that it was almost like a meta movie. Like, Ricky was the one that was, like, engineering all of it, like, as an entertaining, as entertainment for his party that he was having. And, like, the argument that he made for it was actually pretty compelling. Yeah. Because Ricky's character is kind of like, I'm not going to say he's, like, the audience surrogate, but he's kind of, like, a little bit outside of it, and he's just kind of like watching what's going on. He just thinks everything that's going on is hilarious and awesome, and he just wants like all his friends to see it. And so they're just like sitting out on the porch with the pizza or whatever, and you know, he kind of gets involved with it and stuff like that, but it's interesting, like, how his character kind of interacts with all of it, like almost like he's watching all of it from afar, but it's almost kind of like he's controlling it as well. But this guy had that kind of approach to the movie, and I thought that was kind of interesting, and I was like, yeah, I guess that is
movie
kind
takes
of
you back
accurate.
to time when you take your mom's car, go pick up your friends, you go down to Blockbuster Video, rent down video, and then you go to the arcade, play some fucking Akari Warriors, or Rastan, or some shit like that for a few hours, and then you go back and watch movies.
Yeah,
it was from that era.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly.
It's
what
got
this
that
is.
vibe. I could see that interior design of Blockbuster Video as I watch it.
And like I said, and you mentioned this before, it's like, yeah, I can give like a synopsis of the plot and stuff like that. It's like, oh, creepy
Doesn't
neighbors,
really
and
do
they turn.
justice.
But you really have to see it because so much of the comedy in it, and a lot of it is physical comedy too, particularly from Tom Hanks. It's just like his facial expressions, like the way he moves his arms and stuff like that.
It's almost kind of vaudevillian.
Yeah, it's just like really, really funny. Like one of my favorite scenes, like I said, after this fucking speech he gives at the end, before they realize that the Klopeks are actually murderers, when he's giving this speech to Rick Ducommun, I mean, the fucking houses are on fire, the cops are there, it's like everyone's like standing out, it's the middle of the night, it's this big disaster area, and he's like yelling at Rick Ducommun like how they're the crazy ones and we should leave these people alone, they didn't do anything to us. And then there's like this big long pause, and then Rick Ducommun's like, so what, you want me to like move or something? And then Tom Hanks just like pauses, and then he just runs at him and starts like wailing the shit out of him. And it's just like his timing on that is just like impeccable. And everything about it, like, when one of the Klopeks like gives him the fucking sardine, and his wife's like, yeah, eat it, just to be polite or whatever. And then he's like put it in his mouth, and he's like, you could tell it's like totally disgusting, and he's just like, there's this big long shot of him just like trying to swallow it. It's just like great little shit like that.
Can never understand how people could eat those.
Yeah, I can't either. It's like, I don't know. I love fish. I even like really fishy. I even like fishy tasting fish, but I can't.
I can eat those oysters out of the can, but I can't eat those. I can't eat those fish.
It's just too oily. Nasty. There's so much
Kippers
oil
and shit like that. Nasty.
Yeah, and they don't smell that good either. But yeah, so like I said, Shudder just added this. Actually, they added a whole bunch of Joe Dante movies. They added Gremlins 1, Gremlins 2, The New Batch. And like I said, The Burbs, I'm going to go out on a limb and say I actually like this a little bit better than the first Gremlins. Just because it's more of a black comedy. I guess you could say Gremlins is a black comedy too, but it's more of just a zany comedy that just has some horror movie elements to it. It's not all that scary. This one's not really scary either, but like I said, it's more grounded in reality, and it just has more of a blackly comedic kind of tone. And I think like the ensemble cast is really the best part of it. It's like everybody is good in this, and just the way they interact with each other is just like super funny.
It's just a good late 80s movie. There's it held up. It held up for a movie of its time.
Well, yeah, and like any movie, you have to see it, within the cultural context.
Yeah.
And maybe I always kind of wonder about that, because I'm like, maybe we like these, but although people that didn't live through the 80s seem to still like movies from the 80s, but it probably has like more of a richness, more of a resonance for us because we lived through it.
Yeah, I talk to some of our subscribers online every now and then, and I'll recommend some of the older movies to like some young people, like Sophie. And her and her boyfriend will watch them, and I don't think they quite have the same impact for them because they weren't there at the time. They're like, these are kind of dumb old movies. That's. You know what I mean? Like,
I don't know. And yeah, it's
showing somebody who's 21 years old, showing them Total Recall, the original with Arnold Schwarzenegger, is not the same as showing it to a 50-year-old man who was there.
Although I was alive when that Total Recall came out, and I still think it's kind of cheesy.
Yeah, it was cheesy then, but it was cheesy then, but we loved it. You know what I mean? It didn't have to look realistic. It was kind of a comic book movie.
Yeah.
And it was a bunch of fantasy, science fiction fantasy, and it was a mind-bending type stuff. We did a show on it.
Yeah.
We did a show on that, didn't we?
We did, yeah.
And, it wasn't meant to be taken totally seriously. It was just to make you think,
Were we more forgiving?
Yeah. Back then? Yeah.
Yeah. Might have been.
Yeah, because movie budgets were nowhere near as big as they are now.
Yeah, true.
I mean, they're making $500 million budget movies and shit.
Although I have to tell you that, like, sometimes we see, like, these really big budget movies, like, with a lot of CGI, and it still looks fake.
Yeah, it still doesn't look that good. So, I mean,
I'd take a Rubber Monster any day of the week. At least it's there.
Some of those iconic movies like, that Arnold Schwarzenegger was pumping out were from, what's the name of that old studio? Corelio?
What are you talking about?
That old 80s studio. Corelio, I think it was. It was the symbol was all the C's in the inside.
Canon?
No, not Canon. Not that bad. Not that bad.
I don't remember.
I think it was Corelio was the name of it. And, these movies were only a couple million to make.
Yeah.
And they're still around.
Yeah.
Well,
even nowadays, I'm kind of like, I don't know, maybe it's because we grew up in the 70s and 80s. If something is entertaining, I don't care how shitty it looks. Mm-hmm. And you know me, I'll watch pretty much anything. Pretty much anything. We were talking about this in the car the other day, because we were talking about our matinee show where we go see movies and stuff. And I was just kind of like, I don't have a problem going to see pretty much anything. The only thing I can't really stomach is like really like schlocky, like that dog movie that we watched. Yeah. Like that was painful. That was like painful to sit through.
Christian adjacent movies.
Yeah, like all those like really just super earnest. It's
almost like a religious flick.
Yeah, like I can't. That's pretty much the only thing I can't really sit through. Yeah. I will sit through pretty much anything else. Don't test me on that, but I'm just saying. Obviously there's certain genres that I like better than others, but I'm pretty open to like whatever, because there have been movies in genres I don't really care for that I thought were awesome. You know what I mean? I'm not a huge fan of Westerns, but there's a lot of Westerns that I think are really awesome. You know what I mean? So it's that kind of thing. So I don't know if it's just like an age thing or anything like that. But if you like 80s movies and you particularly like, if you like Gremlins or, The Howling even, which The Howling was more of a horror movie, but I guess it had some comedic elements too. Joe Dante always kind of puts some funny shit in his movies. I would call this a pretty much straight up, it's a comedy with a large dollop of horror in it. A black comedy, I would call it, with some horror elements. So if you haven't seen it, like I said, it tends to fly under the radar because everyone talks about Gremlins, but I feel like more people should probably see this one because it's really funny. It has like a really lot of funny quotable lines, a lot of physical humor that I can't do it because it's you have to see it. Lame. Yeah, you have to see it. Right. And Shudder just added it the other day, so if you have Shudder, then you can check it out, and everybody should. So go check it out right now because we said so. Yep. And that'll do it for our latest movie retrospective. Remember, if you like the show, like, share, subscribe on all your social media. And if you'd like to financially support the show, you can go to our Patreon page, patreon.com/13o'clockpodcast, or go to our blog, which is 13o'clockpodcast.wordpress.com. And there's a button in the sidebar to a PayPal account. If you'd like to give a one-time donation, it would be much appreciated. Remember that our regular episodes come out every Tuesday. These movie retrospectives, just like this one, come out every Friday. And 13 o'clock matinee, 3 new movies in the theater, come out every Sunday, so check them out. We will see you next time. Bye.